What does justice smell like when it comes from an oven? Is it the warm hush of rising dough, the soft crackle of crust just as the heat gives way to hush? Or is it the sudden, sick silence of a house that had once ruled with noise, now fallen still under the hand of a mother with flour on her brow and vengeance in her prayer? They said Dinah only baked bread, but they never saw her eyes. They never heard how she hummed scripture while stirring, never wondered what she whispered into the rising yeast. They never questioned how the loaves fed to the master's table began to arrive sweeter, heavier, darker with time. They never saw the herbs she grew beneath the floorboards, never knew what she gathered beneath her tongue when no one watched. This is not a tale of rage. It is a psalm of resolve, a gospel of silence broken by slow fire, of a woman whose hands gave life to bread and death to those who thought her hands were nothing. This is Dinah's story, the bread maker, the slave, the mother, the prophet in flour. And this is the night the big house fell quiet forever. You will not forget the scent. The morning always started with water, cold, still, pulled from the earth's mouth before the sky had stirred. Dinah's hands would dip into the heavy tin basin, fingers wrinkling in the chill, before she lifted the pail and poured silence into the cast-iron pot. The coals beneath the stove were never fully dead. Some ash still glowed from the night before, like a whisper that refused to end. She never spoke when she worked. Not in those early hours. The house was still asleep, and so were the ghosts. Her bare feet moved across the stone floor like memory. Her skirt brushed the ground like mist. The scullery was not much, a crooked bench, a soot-blackened oven, walls the color of smoke, but she moved through it like a priestess through a ruined temple. No one ever looked twice at Dinah, not the mistress, whose voice cracked like dry parchment, not the master, who never bothered to learn her name. Not the children who snatched crusts from her tray without thanks. She was background, steam, utility, a shadow in the corner with flour on her hands, but that was how she survived. Dinah had learned from her mother and her mother before her that silence was a kind of blade, that if you kept your head low and your rhythm steady, the whip might forget your back. And if you made yourself small enough, still enough, obedient enough, sometimes the pain passed you by. But Dinah wasn't just surviving. She was storing. Every loaf she made held something more than dough. Every need was a prayer for the daughter she buried in a grave without a name. Every rise was a slow-burning promise. Every crust had heat behind it that didn't come from fire. They thought she was just the bread maker, but bread remembers hands, and Dinah's hands had known both cradle and shackle. She could make flour sing. She could coax yeast to rise even in the dead air of August. She remembered the exact pinch of salt her mother used in Carolina, the way her aunt used molasses in Georgia, the crushed bay leaves from that hidden tree in Mississippi. She could flavor loaves so they carried sweetness without sugar, warmth without spice. Her memory was her measure, her grief the grain. The kitchen was both sanctuary and sentence. It was the one place the whip rarely entered, not because it held respect, but because the masters feared the chaos of hunger. And so Dinah was left to the ovens, the kneading boards, the great stone pestle with its hollowed wooden bowl. They left her in the kitchen, and in that heat she remembered who she was. The scullery girls whispered about her. "She never cries," said Lottie once. "She doesn't need to," said me. "She put it all in the bread." The white folks didn't hear, but the bread did. She baked for the big house, 3 loaves each morning, 2 before dusk, cornbread when the guests arrived, sweet rolls on Sunday. Biscuits for the boys, honey wheat for the mistress. She served them warm and wrapped in white cloth. Sometimes the mistress praised the texture. Sometimes the master grunted his approval through mouthfuls, and Dinah would nod, say nothing, return to her oven, But there was one thing they never noticed, how her fingers moved in rhythm with an older song. A humming too low to hear. A rhythm deep like bones under dirt. The rhythm of the women before her. The ones who ground wild roots in secret. The ones who whispered to fire like it was a child. The ones who stirred truth into stew. The big house thought it owned the kitchen, but Dinah knew better. The fire burned for her. The bread rose for her, and one day something else would rise too. It was near dusk when she first saw the plant. She was walking the long path to the well, pail swinging at her side when she saw it. Growing low, hidden beneath the bramble beside the barn wall, thin green stems, purple berries like ink blots on its crown. Nightshade. She stopped. The sun cut long golden fingers across the earth, but the shadow that fell over that plant was older than light. Dinah knelt, touched the stem, gently, as if greeting a guest from another world. She didn't pick it, she only looked, but her eyes changed. She remembered her grandmother's voice then, faint from a time before chains. "Not all roots heal, child," she once said. "Some are made for when the prayers stop working." Dinah stood. The pail in her hand felt heavier than water. The path back to the scullery stretched long like a lifetime, but the weight in her chest had shifted. She returned to the kitchen. She lit the fire again, not because she needed to bake, but because something had awakened, something quiet, something sacred. And as the coals began to hum and the oven groaned, Dinah placed her palms on the wood and whispered a psalm no one had taught her, something older than language, older than fear. The steam rose again, but this time it was not just from bread. It was from the breath of a woman who had buried too much and knelt too long, and finally remembered that even flour can be a weapon if needed with the right kind of silence. She did not sleep that night. She watched the sky through the cracks in the kitchen roof, counting the stars like names lost to time. And outside, beneath the barn wall, the nightshade waited. So did Dinah. So did the fire. So did the justice rising in her oven. The morning Tamar died, the sun came up like it always did, soft and cruel. No trumpet, no thunder, no sign from the heavens. Just light falling through the cypress trees, crawling over the cabins like a thief. Dinah was already awake, already shaping dough, already pressing the heels of her hands into the breathless skin of flour and water when the scream came. It wasn't Tamar's. It was Lottie, breathless, shouting, "The overseer's wife! She Tamar!" The bowl fell. Dough slumped across the table. The fire stilled in the oven as if listening. Dinah didn't run. She didn't shout. She walked, her feet were slow on the dirt path. The same path Tamar had run down 100 times barefoot, laughing, chasing the chickens that strutted too proud. The path she'd once dragged her rag doll along, made of sugar sack and corn husk. They found the child by the woodpile. The overseer's wife stood nearby, brushing her hands off like she'd just dusted flour from them. Her face was red with fury, not shame. She muttered about sass, about not obeying, about uppity little mouths. Tamar was still like stone, still like secrets, still like something sacred no one had the right to touch. Dinah did not cry, not then. She knelt. Her daughter's body was light, lighter than it should have been, lighter than the soul that had once filled it. Dinah carried her like she used to, one arm beneath her knees, the other cradling her back. Tamar's curls brushed against her mother's neck like a last breath. She walked past the mistress, past the men who dared not meet her gaze, past the girls who wept behind their hands. She took her baby home. No one followed. She washed the dress first. It was white, or had been once. A child's Sunday dress, frayed at the hem, patched at the elbow. Dinah laid it in the tin basin and poured warm water over it slowly. The blood rose like smoke from fabric, like grief with no sound. She scrubbed, not rough, but steady. She scrubbed as though scrubbing would undo it, would unwind time, would wake her girl. The blood clung, faint, rust-colored now. She added lie. The smell stung her eyes. She kept scrubbing. Outside, the wind blew soft. The crows gathered on the fence post, watching as Dinah washed not just a dress but the world, as if the stains of it all could be wrung out by a mother's hands. When the cloth was finally clean, she folded it, damp and cold, laid it across a wooden chair. Then she turned to Tamar. The body was still warm. Dinah bathed her gently, as if it were just another night. As if Tamar might giggle at the water splash and ask about the stars again. Her fingers moved with memory. She cleaned behind the ears, washed the toes, dried the curls, braided hair. She wrapped her daughter in a shawl her own mother once made, a scrap of blue and brown, woven with songs no one sang aloud anymore. Then she sat beside her. For hours, no tears, no rage, just stillness. There is a silence deeper than grief. It is the silence when God does not answer, when prayer dries up in the throat, when justice stays sleeping. Dinah sat in that silence, and something inside her broke, but not in the way they feared, not loud, not mad. Something sacred cracked open. That night when the house was dark and the kitchen girls slept, Dinah rose. She walked barefoot through the trees, past the edge of the garden to the place where the roots grew wild and forgot. The spot behind the barn where the nightshade had bloomed just days before. She crouched low. This time she picked the spring, just one. Snapped the stem with care, wrapped it in a cloth the size of her palm. Then she picked another and another, until her hands smelled like shadow. These were not herbs for healing, these were for remembering. She returned to the scullery, lit no lamps, just the coals. The heat rose around her like a breath, and there in the hush of the kitchen, Dinah began to hum. It was not a hymn from the big house. Not a church tune or a slave song passed through the cabins. It was older, raw, almost broken. A tune that twisted like smoke. A melody with no beginning, no words, just sound. A sound her grandmother once sang when the chains were too tight and the fire too far away. A song no one dared keep alive, but Dinah remembered. And Tamar, wherever she now lay, would remember too. She crushed the leaves in the mortar, ground them to powder, measured it with the precision of someone who knew life and death were not opposites, but neighbors. She did not use it, not yet. She only made it ready. And as she pressed her fingers to the powder, her lips moved, not in plea, but in warning. Enough. One word, like scripture, like thunder without lightning. The next morning, the mistress asked for warm bread. Dinah nodded, returned to the oven, roll out the dough, pressed gently, let it rise, but something had changed in the air, something sacred, something sharp. And as the loaves baked and the scent of yeast rose through the halls, the big house had no idea what was beginning. Justice had entered the kitchen. And it was wearing flour. Bread is a quiet thing. It does not scream when it changes. It does not beg as it burns. It rises slowly, breath by breath, until what was once dust becomes flesh. In Dinah's hands, bread had always been sacred, but now it was something else. A psalm, a protest, a weapon whispered through warmth. The day after Tamar's burial, the oven burned hotter than it had in years. Dinah stoked it with care, not fury. She woke before the stars were gone, her apron already tied, her hands dry and steady. The kitchen girls stayed quiet. They watched her knead in silence, the way a priest might watch a prophet. Dinah said no words, but everything about her had shifted. Her shoulders didn't slump, her breath was deep, her eyes no longer looked away. They looked through. She began with the brown bread first, wheat and lard, made heavy for the overseer's table. He liked it dark and bitter. She made it darker now. Let it sit longer. Let it swell with heat. She stirred in a powder the others didn't see, crushed root, dried leaf, bits gathered by moonlight and memory. Next came the sweet rolls, molasses, cinnamon bark, butter churned that very morning. These were for the children of the big house. She folded them gently, braided them like hair, But this time the sweetness was not comforting. It was confusing, cloak, deceive. The poison was not in the taste. It was in the truth. Dinah knew the dosage. Her grandmother had whispered it through breath and blood. A little makes the body forget its own shape. A little more and sleep becomes scripture. Too much and the soul flees before the mouth can scream. But Dinah wasn't ready for that, not yet. Justice, she knew, must rise slowly, like bread, like grief. The kitchen smelled divine by midday. Even the mistress commented, "What did you use today, Dinah? The air smells like God's own table." Dinah bowed her head. "Just what the garden gave, ma'am." The mistress laughed. "Then we ought to thank the dirt." She tore a piece of cornbread and dipped it in butter, not knowing what clung to its crust, not tasting the thin edge of sleep woven into the steam. She would sleep longer that night than she ever had before. The overseer took 2 thick slices. He always ate standing up, as if afraid someone might challenge him mid-bite. He chewed hard, loud, always watching, always suspicious. But this time his jaw slowed. He blinked more than usual. The corners of his mouth twitched like strings pulled by unseen hands. He grunted something, thanks, maybe. Then I left. Dinah wiped the counter with steady hands. The cloth swept a circle across the wood again and again, as if erasing something no one else could see. That evening, one of the big house children began to cry in her sleep. "Strange dreams," the maid said. "She speakin' in tongues, callin' names don't belong to her." The mistress dismissed it. Too much sugar. Children always see ghosts after cake. But Dinah heard the child's voice through the walls. "Don't touch me, don't touch me," again and again. Tamar's voice once sounded like that, just before sleep, just after punishment. Now it echoed from lips that had never been whipped, from lungs that had never learned fear. Dinah knelt in the pantry that night, among the dried beans and sacks of rice. She didn't pray with words. She pressed her hand against the wooden shelf and hummed. The same tune, the same sorrow. The same slow psalm. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a promise. 3 days later, the mistress complained of nausea. "My stomach feels like a snake lives in it." The doctor came. He had hands too clean, eyes too confident. He sniffed and frowned and asked about diet, exposure, stress. "Could be the heat," he said. "Could be God," Dinah murmured. "Could be worms," he corrected, but his medicine did nothing. The fever came anyway, then the chills, then the weight behind the eyes, the sleep that hovered like fog. Still, no one suspected the bread maker. They never do. Each morning, Dinah baked as if nothing had changed. The loaves lined the window sill, steaming like prayers. The kitchen girls learned not to ask. They only watched. Watched how Dinah weighed each pinch, stirred each bowl, wrapped each portion in linen like it was holy. And maybe it was. Not holy in the way the preacher claimed, loud, righteous, soaked in sweat. No, this was holy like grief, holy like rage with no voice, holy like a mother who had nothing left but recipes. One evening, Dinah stayed late in the kitchen, though the baking was done. She stared into the fire. Its orange mouth yawned open. The coals pulsed like heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. In her lap was a folded cloth. Inside, more roots, more herbs, some dried, some are still damp from the morning dew. She reached into her apron and removed a thin stone bowl, poured the crushed contents in, stirred with a bone spoon. She wasn't making anything yet. She was preparing, measuring the days, watching the signs. The mistress, now too tired to brush her own hair. The master, silent over his wine, rubbing his temples like thunder, lived inside them. The overseer, waking late, his steps less firm, his stare more distant. The house had not fallen, but it had begun to tilt. And all the while Dinah's bread rose, each loaf a sermon, each bite a verse, each crumb a prophecy whispered in heat. The psalm inside the loaves grew louder, but no one could hear it yet. Only Tamar on earth might have heard. And maybe, just maybe, she was smiling. The sickness did not arrive like thunder. It crept, slow, soft-footed, slipping through the floorboards and under the silver forks. It did not roar, it breathed. It settled into the bowls and between the sheets. The big house had no idea what it was eating. The first to falter was the mistress. She rose late one morning and complained of vertigo. Said the sky tilted when she walked. Said her hands couldn't button the pearl on her collar. The doctor was summoned again. He smelled the pillows, examined the chamber pot, pressed behind her ears with professional grace. Too much southern heat, he said. She eats little, Dinah whispered. She eats enough, he replied. Still the mistress sweated through her nightgown until it clung like a second skin. Her vision blurred. Her sentences grew strange. She asked Dinah if the bread had spoken to her. Dinah only smiled. No, ma'am, bread doesn't have teeth. A week passed. Then the master complained of a headache so sharp he swore the devil lived behind his eyes. He grew pale, snapped at the servants, asked for quiet in rooms already hushed. He skipped dinner. The bread went uneaten. Dinah noted it, marked it, adjusted. She kneaded the next day's loaves slower. With both hands pressed deep, she whispered the names of all her dead. Her grandmother killed for hiding herbs. Her uncle sold for singing a forbidden tune. Her daughter buried in silence. Each name pressed into the dough like a brand. She baked with care, wrapped the loaves in fresh white linen. When the master returned to the table, he ate 2 slices, and afterward he slept like the grave had reached up and touched him on the cheek. The overseer noticed. He watched the bread, watched Dinah, watched the air. He began to leave pieces uneaten, crusts tucked beneath his napkin. He poured his wine too fast, spoke too loud. The other servants said he muttered in his sleep. Dreams, he'd spit. Dreams with no end. The little girl's eyes, they glow. No one answered him. He once grabbed Dinah by the wrist, hard. What's in the dough? He growled. She looked at him. Her voice was calm. Flour, sir, salt, the Lord's mercy. He flinched, let go. She turned back to the oven. The house began to sag beneath the weight of what it could not name. The floors creaked with a new sound. The dining hall stood emptier each evening, though no one had left. The cook remarked how the air felt strange. Like it held its breath. The children refused to eat biscuits, saying they tasted like dust and dreams. The mistress stopped attending church. When the preacher visited, he stood on the porch uneasy. His eyes wandered to the windows. Seems like there's a spirit in this place, he said, offering to bless the home. The master declined. We don't need ghosts chased out, he barked. Just good sense. Still that night the mistress placed her rosary beneath her pillow. Dinah saw it. Dinah smiled. Downstairs, the kitchen burned warm. The bread rose, obedient, silent. Each loaf took its shape from Dinah's hands. Each crust bore her intent. She began adding touches, thyme from the back garden, ground fennel, a seed that looked like ash and smelled like bitter lemon. The flavor grew complex, not unpleasant but strange. The guests who passed through, lawyers, cotton brokers, cousins, ate the bread and said nothing, though their eyes glassed over by the second course. 2 fainted on the porch the same evening. The doctor called it exhaustion. The house believed him. Only Dinah knew the truth. The bread no longer fed the house. It held its sin, its violence, its arrogance, like a vessel in linen. One night the mistress called Dinah to her chamber. She sat propped up with pillows, her skin gray, her hair unbrushed. You've been here for how long now, Dinah? Since I was 14, ma'am. The mistress nodded, her eyes wandered. You bake every morning. Every morning I smell it. Smells like something lost. She reached out as if to touch Dinah's arm, but stopped. My bones ache, Dinah. Dinah bowed her head. Sorry to hear it, ma'am. Sometimes I feel like the house is sick. Dinah looked up. Maybe it's just remembering, ma'am. The mistress frowned. Remembering what? Dinah didn't answer. The fire popped in the hearth like an old secret. Outside, the sky darkened. Inside, the house sank deeper into quiet. The servants whispered less. The overseer paced more. The master sat at his desk for hours, staring at the wall. No pen in his hand, no ink on the page, just stillness. A sacred kind of stillness. The kind that comes before burial, and yet the bread still came, twice a day, steaming, fragrant, laced with history. The kitchen girls no longer asked what Dinah added. They simply stepped back when she worked. I watched her hum. I watched her hands. I watched her move with the rhythm of something ancient. She never raised her voice, never broke a plate. Never screamed, but every slice of bread was a verse, and every crust was a drumbeat in a war only she knew was coming. By now, even the mice avoided the pantry, even the crows circled lower, even the shadows changed shape, but no one could say why. Only that the house had begun to eat its own silence, and in that silence Dinah was queen. He was a man of suspicion, even before the bread. The overseer had always walked like he owned the dirt under his feet, like he expected the ground to rise for him. His boots cracked against the porch boards each morning like the lash he wore at his hip. He did not smile unless it hurt someone. He did not rest unless another paid the cost. But now he watched. He watched the bread more than he watched the slaves. He watched Dinah more than he watched the gates. He did not know why. Only that something in the house had shifted, and she was always at the center of it. He came into the kitchen one morning. Uninvited, heavy, loud. The girls froze. Dinah kept kneading. The rhythm of her hands never faltered. Flour rose in the air like ghost dust. The dough turned beneath her fingers like a breath. The overseer stood close, too close. "What's in it?" he asked. Dinah didn't look up. "Bread." He leaned in, voice sharp. "No, what else?" She paused, wiped her hands on her apron, turned toward him. "Prayer," she said, "and the Lord's will." He didn't like that, not the words, not calm, not the way she stood tall without raising her voice. He began refusing the bread, started pushing his plate aside at supper, muttered something about sourness, about strange smells, about the way it sat wrong in his belly. He tried to warn the master. "Taste it yourself," he said. "You'll see, she's doing something to it." The master waved him off. "She's been baking here 20 years. You think she's only just now learning mischief?" "She buried her girl last month," the overseer hissed. "That changes a woman." The master sipped his wine. "So does loyalty, so does age. Go do your job." But the overseer didn't forget. He began inspecting the kitchen, unfolding the linen wraps, sniffing the flour sacks, watching what herbs were gathered from the back garden. He began following Dinah. She noticed, but she said nothing. She only baked slower, smiled more, and hummed louder. He once caught her whispering in the pantry. Alone, he stormed in, demanding names. "Who are you talking to?" She looked at him without fear. "My grandmother. She's dead. She ain't deaf." He slapped the shelf beside her head. Jars rattled, spices fell, but Dinah didn't flinch. She wiped a fallen pinch of thyme from the floor and sprinkled it back into her apron pocket. "You done, sir?" she asked. He left, but not before knocking over the basin of water. She cleaned it in silence. But in the wet on the floor, she saw it. The war was coming to her oven, and she had already begun to win. A week later, he gave in. Hunger has a way of cracking even the hardest jaw. He hadn't eaten since morning. His stomach turned in knots. The master had sent him on a ride to town, and the sun had worn him thin. He returned bitter, dust on his boots, hate in his mouth. But the scent of the kitchen, warm bread, golden and thick, met him on the porch like a hymn. He entered, grabbed a piece, sat on the bench, chewed, watched Dinah the whole time, like he could catch her guilt between bites. Like the poison would leap up and confess. She did not offer water. She did not ask how it tasted. She only returned to the oven. An hour later he began to sweat, not from the sun, from something deeper. His pulse slowed. His vision swam. He stumbled out onto the steps, hat falling behind him. His hands trembled. "The heat," he muttered. But it was not the heat, it was judgment. It was Tamar's name carved into the crust of every slice he had ignored. It was Dinah's silence wrapped around his throat like a second collar. That night he dreamed. He dreamed of a little girl with fire in her eyes. She stood by the well holding a loaf of bread. It was blackened. It bled when she tore it. She offered it to him. When he refused, the bread turned to ash, and the girl vanished. He awoke screaming, and in the distance, somewhere in the kitchen, he heard humming, soft, patient, holy. The next day, he left his plate untouched, but the damage had been done. His fear had bloomed. He began to whisper to the stable boys. "She's got roots under her fingernails. She burns things in the night. I saw her talking to the wind." They nodded, wide-eyed, but they did not report her. Somehow they understood, not the details, no, not the herbs, not the dreams, but justice. The fire moved slowly and sweet like syrup. The overseer tried to reclaim control, barked louder, whipped more, beat a boy for dropping a spoon. But even the lash didn't sound the same anymore. The house had changed. And so had its breath. The overseer was no longer feared. He was only watching, and the bread he would not eat, it fed everyone else. It warmed their bellies, it stirred their memories, it reminded them that power can rise slowly, but when it does, it cannot be unmade. In the kitchen, Dinah baked as always, measured, kneaded, whispered. The oven flickered with light older than fire. And the overseer, pacing the porch with empty hands and an aching stomach, realized too late he should have swallowed. At first, it was only murmurs in the night. The mistress spoke aloud in her sleep, muddled phrases, slurred names, scraps of songs no one had ever taught her. Her chambermaid said she rolled from one side to the other, clutching the sheets like they were drowning her. "She callin' on things," the maid whispered, "not prayers." By the third night she was answering voices that no one could hear, and by the seventh she was singing not hymns, not lullabies, not songs from her white childhood days of lace and parlor. No, she was singing slave songs, words she should not have known, words not written anywhere but bone. It began in a whisper, soft, broken. In the dark, as the fire dimmed and her eyes lost sight, her lips moved. "Wade, wade in the water," the maid froze. Dinah heard it from the hallway. Her spine stiffened. That song, that holy song, the one her own mother hummed when scrubbing blood from her father's shirt, the one the old man Isaac sang when they dragged his sister away, the one Tamar once asked to learn, and Dinah said, "No, not yet, baby. That song is too heavy for your chest." Now it came from the mistress's mouth, like a ghost had slipped it past her teeth. By morning, she didn't remember. "Did I speak?" She asked, groggy, pale, her skin like waxed paper. "Yes, ma'am," the maid said softly. "You were praying, I think." The mistress frowned. "I haven't prayed in years." She sipped weak tea, nibbled dry toast, refused bread, said it made her tongue feel thick. Dinah stood nearby, silent, watchful. She knew what was happening. The sickness was more than flesh. It had reached the soul. That night the song returned, stronger, clearer. She sat upright in bed, eyes wide but unseeing, and sang a verse not even the oldest slave remembered in full. "Hide me in the hollow tree where the dogs can't sniff, and the river takes my memory," the words cracked. Bled, cut through the walls, the maid wept in the hallway. Dinah did not weep. She stood at the threshold, eyes like stone, ears wide open. The fire behind her flickered. The air smelled of time and something bitter, like ash soaked in sugar. The doctor returned. Pressed his cold fingers against her wrist. Counted, frowned. "She's delirious." "No fever," the master said. "She's still delirious," the doctor insisted. Could be her conscience, some women, he trailed off. What about the bread? The overseer asked from the corner. The doctor chuckled. Bread doesn't bring madness. Dinah wiped her hands on her apron and turned. No, sir, she said quietly. Bread just reminds folk of what they tried to forget. No one replied. From then on, she did not sleep deeply. She wandered. In the early hours, she'd appear in the hallways, barefoot, nightgown dragging, rosary in hand, though she never said the beads. She knocked on closed doors, whispering names of slaves who had died. She asked the cook, "Where's the girl with the red ribbons?" There was no such girl. She set the table for 5 when only 3 lived in the house. She knelt at the fireplace and muttered into the ashes. One night she wept into the bread bin. This is what I fed them, this is what I fed them. Dinah found her there, gently pulled her up, took her by the hand, led her back to bed, not with kindness, but with silence, a holy silence, one that smelled like justice wearing linen gloves. On the 7th night she began to scream, but not in terror, in tune. She sang as if her throat remembered things her mind did not. She sang like the wind was pulling the lyrics from the past. Slaves gathered by the windows. Servants crept from their quarters. They heard their own grandmothers in her voice. They heard chains and water, and moaning prayers stitched into the dirt. Steal away, the Lord doesn't wait for no bell, she wept as she sang, held her hands to her mouth like she was trying to shove the songs back inside. But they came anyway. It came like a flood, came like fire. The master would not look at her any more. He stayed in the study, drinking until dawn. The children were sent away to a cousin's home. The overseer muttered about demons, but Dinah knew better. This was not possession, this was a confession. The mistress's soul had broken under the weight of the bread. It had cracked like a crust, revealing the heat within. In the garden the herbs grew tall. Dinah harvested carefully. A little rude, a little bitterroot, a petal that curled when touched. She ground them with calm hands, not in rage, but in right. She mixed them with honey, dried them into flakes. The next morning she served the mistress a tea the color of copper. "For your shaking, ma'am," she said. The mistress sniffed it, drank slowly, then whispered, "Do you forgive me?" Dinah did not answer. She turned and hummed the song the mistress had sung 2 nights before, the one Tamar had asked to learn. That evening, as the sky turned purple behind the trees, the mistress sat upright in bed and sang one final verse. "Don't bury me in no churchyard tree, let the river take what's left of me." Then silence. She did not die, but something in her did. And for the first time in her life, she looked out the window at the cabins and bowed her head, as if she finally saw them, not slaves, but shadows that had learned to sing. Poison is a word they made for what they fear, but to Dinah it was not poison, it was a calculation, it was a choice. It was the softest way justice could speak. She did not seek to destroy, she sought to divide, to distinguish between the guilty and the spared. To deliver consequences with care, to separate punishment from wrath. Even wrath, when wielded by a mother, can be sacred. She kept 2 jars in the pantry. One was marked with a black string, the other a red. The black held roots that twisted in the mortar like old scars, heavy, bitter, unforgiving. The kind that shut down breath, that made hearts forget to beat. That sent the eyes rolling like marbles on the tide. The red held something gentler, petals dried in linen, sweet bark. Something to bring slow sleep. Something to keep mouths shut, not permanently, but long enough to listen to the silence between guilt and regret. She only used the black for the ones who deserved to forget. Forever. The red was for mercy, and she measured them both with the same solemn care. She did not work alone now. The kitchen girls began to watch her with new reverence. Me, the youngest, brought her nettle without being asked. Lottie helped dry lemon balm on the roof under moonlight. Even old Ruth, who had once called Dinah too quiet for fire, began whispering to the flour sacks like they could hear her grief. They did not ask what was going into the bread. They only asked, "Who is this one for?" And Dinah would glance toward the house. "The older boy," she'd say, or "the mistress's sister, she has too much tongue and no memory." Or, "Nobody today, we let God rest." One afternoon, Ruth pulled Dinah aside. "Girl, how do you know who gets what? Ain't we all sufferin'?" Dinah looked her in the eye. "There's a difference," she said, "between those who swing the lash and those who clap while it's swingin'." Ruth nodded. She understood. The mercy wasn't random. It was ancestral, measured not by skin but by spirit. Some souls were rotten, others just asleep. Dinah offered sleep first, always. The mistress's cousin arrived one day, a proud man, clean nails, thick neck, smug smile. He said he came to help manage things, said the house was falling into superstition. Laughed. When the children refused the biscuits. Laughed louder when the master forgot his own birthday. He called Dinah girl. Never by name, he requested pie, demanded it in fact, so Dinah baked one, with crusts so soft they fell apart under breath, with peaches soaked in something just sweet enough to feel safe. He ate 2 slices, and the next day he couldn't remember where he was. I tried to kiss the mirror, cried when it didn't speak back, left the following week trembling. The kitchen girls laughed that night, but Dinah did not. He was given mercy, she said, and mercy ain't always gentle. There were still children in the big house, 2 boys, one means the other is afraid. The mean one once spit at Lottie's shoes, the afraid one once cried when he saw a man whipped. Dinah spared the afraid one, fed him milk bread soaked with herbs that gave him calm, not sickness, sleep, not haunting, but the mean one, she watched him, waited. He slapped the maid's hand once. Dinah added a dusting of roux to his slice the next morning, just enough to make his tongue swell, just enough to make him fear his own breath. He didn't hit again. The master by now was slipping. He stopped attending meals, began speaking to shadows, wandered the fields at dusk asking for his dead brother. He did not recognize Dinah when she brought his tray. He looked up, sweat on his brow, and whispered, "Has she forgiven me yet?" Dinah didn't ask who. She only placed the bread on the table. One slice, soft, still warm, laced with red thread mercy, he ate slowly. And that night he did not cry out, did not rise, did not scream for the overseer. Only silence wrapped him, and the house grew quieter still. By now the bread had become scripture, no longer just food. It was judgment in the crust, redemption in crumb. Each loaf said something the mouths of the enslaved could not. Each bite rewrote the story of who held power and who held fire. The white folk ate less, fears more. Slept deeper, dreamed stranger. The black folk whispered more. I walked taller, sang longer. I worked with something behind my eyes, not hope, not yet, but something stronger, a sense that justice, even slow, still breathes. Dinah walked to the herb garden alone each morning. She let the leaves tell her what they were for. Some curled inward, those were for sorrow. Some opened wide, those were for courage. And some trembled in her hands like they remembered the blood in her daughter's dress. Those were for justice. She harvested gently, tucked each one in her apron, blessed them with the same psalm she whispered when she buried Tamar. I don't bury wrath, I planted it, and it grows what I feed. So when they say Dinah poisoned the big house, say this instead. She gave mercy first. I measured it, portioned it. She let sleep come before silence. Let silence come before rot. Only when they refused rest did she serve ruin, and even then she wrapped it in linen. There are mornings that come like smoke, and some that come like silence. But this morning came like neither. It did not come at all. The big house did not stir. Lottie was the first to notice. She had gone to fetch the laundry basket at dawn, like always. The birds were already singing, and the sun had begun its slow stretch over the cotton rows. She reached the steps of the back porch and paused. No sound, no clinking of teacups, no barking orders, No soft steps across the parlor floor, not even the creak of the master's rocking chair. Lottie waited and waited, then turned and ran. Dinah was in the kitchen. The oven was still warm, but the bread was left uncut. She did not look up when Lottie burst through the door. "They ain't woken up," the girl gasped. "None of 'em. I knocked, I called, even the dog just lying there like it's been prayed over." Dinah placed the loaf gently on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, then I walked. The big house stood quiet as a sermon. Windows is still closed, curtains unmoved. A pitcher of water sat untouched on the porch, sweating in the morning heat. Dinah opened the door slowly. No creak, just hush. The kind of hush that fills churches after something sacred has happened or something final. She stepped through the hallway. The rug muffled her steps. The air smelled of lavender and dust. In the drawing room, the master's ledger sat open on the desk, but the pen beside it lay untouched. The fire in the hearth had gone cold. Upstairs, a door hung open. Inside, the mistress lay in bed, breathing, but barely. Her eyes fluttered, chasing dreams too far to grasp. Her lips moved, soundless. The cousin slumped in a velvet chair, one leg draped over the armrest, head tilted back, mouth open. The children, asleep in their beds, not restless, not stirred, just still. The overseer was found face down in the hallway, one arm stretched toward the door like he had tried to crawl out. He hadn't made it. Dinah didn't scream. She didn't weep. She walked slowly from room to room, like a midwife, checking a child that refused to be born. She touched no one, spoke no names, she just listened to the hush, to the breath, to the walls that had always echoed cruelty and now whispered something else. She opened the windows, let the morning in, let the truth inside. Down in the fields, the others began to notice. Me clutched her laundry tight to her chest and looked toward the house. "Why so still?" she whispered. Old Isaac squinted toward the roof, eyes narrowing. "The house has gone quiet," he said. "Like it knows it's wrong." Word spread fast, but no one shouted, no one cheered. They gathered slowly, carefully. One by one they approached the big house, stood beneath the porch, waited. Dinah emerged at last. Her apron is still white, her hands clean. She stood at the top step and looked out at them. Said nothing, just nodded. It was enough. The kitchen girls began to hum, not a song they'd learned, not a church hymn, something older, something is aching. A low hum that wrapped around the columns of the porch and wove through the grass like smoke. The men removed their hats. The women held their children close. The big house still did not wake. For hours they stood there. No orders came. No bells rang, no dogs barked, even the wind waited, and the bread, still warm, still whole, still holy. By mid-afternoon, Dinah returned to the kitchen. She lit the oven again, not to bake, but because the fire had become her altar. She sat beside it and closed her eyes. Listened not to the house, but to what came after it. The sound of birds, the sound of children giggling in the distance. The sound of breathing, free, unhurried, and underneath it all the sound of something rising, not rebellion, not revenge, but readiness. That evening no bread was served, none needed. The big house was too full of its own silence to chew, too full of its own sins to swallow. And in that quiet, Dinah rose from her stool. I walked to the window. I watched the sun fall slowly behind the trees. She didn't smile, she didn't sigh, she only whispered, "I'm sleeping now, let it sleep." It did not begin with flame, it began with stillness. The kind of stillness that falls after a long prayer. A full day had passed, then 2, then 4, and still the big house did not wake. The master remained in his chair, eyes glazed, mouth ajar. The mistress mumbled dreams through cracked lips. The overseer did not rise. The cousin still wept in sleep. They were alive, barely, but their voices were gone. Their power hollow, their hunger mute. The house had fed upon itself, and now it sat bloated in silence. Dinah stood at the edge of the fields and watched the crows circle, not once, not twice, but again and again. Like they had found a place to grieve, not for the masters, but for the land, for the blood beneath it, for the stories buried in its roots. It was Isaac who spoke first. "We can't leave it standin'." They were seated near the old well, a small circle of old men and kitchen girls, mothers and boys with ash still on their sleeves. "If we leave it, another one just like it gone rise in its place," he said. "Same bones, same hate, different paint maybe, but same scream." The women nodded, even Lottie, who trembled as she spoke, whispered, "It seems too much, it holds too much." Dinah said nothing, she only stood and walked back toward the big house. They did not burn it in anger, not in haste. They prepared, removed the living first, dragged the master to the porch, laid him in the shade like a stone no one would touch, pulled the mistress from her feather bed and wrapped her in the same shawl she once refused to let Dinah wash. The cousin was carried like a sack of flour. The overseer dumped at the edge of the fence. No ceremony, no cruelty, just endings. Then they went inside. Room by room, they cleared what they could, photos, blankets. The brass cross was stolen from the church in town. They piled it all in the yard, not as treasure, but as confession. The house, now hollowed, stood like a corpse before burial. Dinah stepped inside one last time. I stood in the dining room, ran her fingers across the long table. Here is where the mistress once criticized the biscuits. Here is where the master cursed the sound of a baby crying. Here is where Tamar once crawled underfoot, chasing shadows. Dinah placed her palm on the center of the table and whispered, "I'm not burning wood. I'm burying a lie." Then she struck the match. The fire did not roar, it sighed, like it had been waiting too long. The curtains caught first, drapes soaked in perfume and dust, then the rug, then the hem of the staircase. By the time the fire reached the chandelier, it was no longer a house. It was a shrine, a tomb, a warning they watched from the fields, every face lit by orange and grief. Some cried, not for the loss, but for justice, for the years that lived in that place, for the hands that scrubbed its floor, the backs that bled against its beams, the Kai, Eldren who learned to be silent in its corners. As the flames licked higher, the walls cracked like brittle skin. One of the boys whispered, "It screams." Isaac shook his head. "No, it's confessin'." Smoke rose high above the trees, thick, black, ancient. It carried the weight of every name that house tried to erase, carried the story, the ache, the final hush. When the last beam collapsed, when the roof caved in like lungs exhaling their last lie, Dinah stepped forward. She knelt at the edge of the ash, picked up a charred spoon, a piece of ribbon, a button, held them in her hands like relics, then let them fall back into the dust. She did not cry, she did not sing, she only whispered, "Now you can sleep." The fire took nothing but their names, not the people, not the truth, not the memory, only the illusion, only the mask. And beneath the ash, the land finally breathed. They thought she would run, that she'd flee into the swamps, disappear like so many others who had tried to vanish into trees and shadow, whose names became echoes in the mouths of grieving mothers. But Dinah did not run. She stayed. She stayed long after the smoke curled to nothing, long after the crows found new branches, long after the last ember sighed its final glow. She stayed like a root, like a stone, like a prayer that refused to end. The big house never rose again. The land grew wild where its bones once stood. Vines climbed over the blackened porch posts. Grass swallowed the foundation. The chimney remained, a crooked tooth against the sky, silent and scorched. People passed it with reverence, some with fear, but none forgot. They called her the Breadmaker. Some said she was a conjure woman, some said she was a mother of fire, some said she spoke to the wind, but those who knew, they said she was justice, soft-spoken, steady-handed, and unshakable. New owners came, not right away. It took months, years. A distant cousin inherited the land, sent word of restoration, redemption, revival. But he never rebuilt the house. Only the fields. He brought new overseers, new workers, new plans, but when he tried to move Dinah, they say the cows wouldn't cross the fence. They say the mule reared back and refused to step on the ash. They say the well dried up for 7 days, so he left her be, gave her the old cabin by the edge of the garden, and she remained. Time passed slowly. The seasons folded in on themselves like warm breadcloths. Children were born, old ones passed. The wind carried fewer screams, but still no one touched the kitchen. It stood empty. The heart is cold, the table is bare. Until one morning when a girl with skin the color of pine bark and braids wrapped in ribbon came to Dinah's door. She held a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside was flour, soft, white, ground fine. She said, "My mama said you could teach me." Dinah looked at her, saw Tamar's smile behind her teeth, saw her grandmother's wisdom in the child's stillness. She stepped aside, opened the door, and the oven that had slept for years began to breathe again. They baked in silence at first. The girl mimicked every move, how to measure by memory, how to knead with your sorrow, not your fists, how to wait not because the bread needed it, but because justice always did. They spoke a few words, but one day the girl asked, "Why do you stay?" Dinah looked at the fire, then at her hands, then at the girl. Because someone had to remember. She taught her everything, which herbs to dry on the 7th day, which roots could speak louder than knives, which songs to hum when you need the spirits to listen. She showed her the jars, black string, red string, and let her choose which one to touch first. She chose the red. Dinah smiled. "Good," she said. "Mercy first, always." Years turned like pages. The girl grew taller, the fields grew quieter, and Dinah grew older. Her back bent, her hands stiffened, but her eyes never dulled, not even once. Not even when the wind brought rumors of war, of freedom, of papers being signed, of men in blue coats and white gloves. She heard it all, said little, only nodded, only stirred the bowl with slower circles, only whispered, "It took too long, but the fire waited." One day Dinah did not rise from her bed. The girl, now a woman, found her wrapped in the shawl she once gave Tamar. The same one she had wrapped around the mistress. The same one that had seen too much and said nothing. Dinah's hands were folded across her chest, palms calloused, fingers curled, a dusting of flour still beneath her nails. She had died in silence, as she had lived, sacred, unshaken. They buried her behind the kitchen, not with fanfare, not with hymns, just earth, just stone, just firelight in every tear. Someone carved her name into wood, Dinah, nothing else, because what more needs to be said? The ground already knew the rest. Years later, long after the war had ended, long after the overseers were dust, and the fields no longer bled, a woman returned. To that land. She was tall, brown-skinned, hair wrapped in cloth the color of river stone. She carried a satchel and walked with purpose, in her hand a single seed of dried rosemary. She stood where the big house once was, ran her fingers across the chimney brick, then knelt and touched the soil. "It's time," she said, and somewhere beneath the ash, beneath the stone, beneath the memory, Dinah smiled. That woman rebuilt the oven, not for punishment, not for poison, but for remembrance. She laid each brick with reverence, swept the hearth with time, and baked the first loaf with her own hands. When it rose, it filled the air with the scent of her ancestors. The air smelled like Tamar's laughter, like Isaac's humming, like Dinah's silence. They say if you walk past that oven on a quiet morning, you'll hear singing, not loud, not mournful, but steady, like a mother teaching her daughter how to knead without anger, how to heal without forgetting, how to make fire kneel. What does justice smell like when it has cooled? Not like fire, not like ash, but like bread left to rest, still warm at the center, still waiting to be broken by hands that remember. They will forget her name in the history books. They always do, but the earth has not. And the wind still hums her hymn through broken shutters and blackened stone. Dinah, breadmaker, mother. Silence turned to smoke. She did not write sermons. She wrote with heat, with patience, with hands that knew how to cradle a child and punish a master. They called it poison. She called it mercy. They called it madness. She called it a memory. And when the house fell silent, it was not vengeance that stood among the ashes, but love sharpened by grief, faith lit by flame, a woman, alone, teaching the fire how to kneel. If you stand by the old oven now, the one rebuilt stone by stone, the one women gather around in the dawn mist, you'll hear the sound of something rising. Not just bread, but the truth, the kind that takes generations to rise. The kind that outlives the big house, the overseer's whip, the master's ledger. The kind Tamar carries in her name wherever her soul now wanders. She is still baking in every act of quiet resistance, in every recipe passed from mother to daughter, in every hush that speaks louder than a scream. She is still baking, and the world at last is learning to taste her justice. Warm, heavy, sacred, like the hush after a hymn. Like the silence before God speaks.